This case takes us to the large market town of Solihull in the West Midlands, England. Home to around 125,000 people, one of which was 22-year-old Renee O'Day. Fleeing the war zone in Syria, she had moved to England with her 2-year-old son to meet her mother Kaula and stepfather Mohammed, who had been living in Solihull for 16 years. Described as intelligent and independent, she quickly became well known in her community and was always doing various things for charity and people less fortunate than herself. Her Aunt Noah said that she had a beautiful singing voice and had big dreams of releasing her own music one day. As soon as she entered the UK, she enrolled in college, and between that and raising her baby boy, there was never a dull day for Reneem. Her aunt recalled how excited she was to be attending college. It was a fresh start for her and her son, and she couldn't wait for what was to come. While studying at Solihull College, she met Janbaz Taran. He too had recently moved to the UK but had actually lied about his age in order to move over. He was permitted entry into the country as a minor fleeing a war zone, declaring his age to be under 18. He was actually 21 years old. He enrolled at the same college, and as soon as he met Reneem, he quickly began pressuring her to date him. Initially resistant, Reneem eventually agreed, and the pair began a relationship in 2016. He would tell her, "When I saw you, I said, this is mine." Despite the relationship being turbulent from the get-go, the pair married less than a year later in an Islamic ceremony. The marriage was not recognized by UK law, and Reneem's family said they begrudgingly gave their blessing. Reneem's aunt said that her niece later revealed the terrifying threats that had made her agree to marry him. Janbaz told her that if she didn't marry him, he would finish her family, as well as Reneem. After the wedding, Reneem confided in her family that she realized she had made a big mistake, but didn't know how to get out of it. Already a possessive and controlling person, Janbaz was now becoming violent, and he quickly began appearing on the police's radar too. Reneem, once so close to her family, was seeing less and less of them, and the visits people made to her flat were now few and far between. Janbaz was telling anyone that would listen that Reneem was causing the issues and was mentally unstable. Even with everything going from bad to worse, Reneem continued studying at college, working hard and making sure her biggest priority, her son, was getting through nursery. Soon Janbaz would be removed from the college when Reneem told teachers about his real age. Reneem was faced with a huge shock when she learned of his very secret life back in Afghanistan. It turned out that Janbaz had another wife who was pregnant, and they already shared 3 children. In 2017, after a long time building herself up to do it, Reneem ended the relationship. Janbaz had been openly bragging about his second life with his friends, laughing at the fact that neither wife knew what was going on. Infuriated that Reneem had left him, Janbaz's harassment was now totally relentless and out of control. Reneem had moved in with her mom, and Janbaz took to sleeping outside her address for 12 consecutive nights, with the neighbors often chasing him away from the street. Reneem told people that she felt her days were now numbered. Her family rallied around her and held a meeting with Janbaz in which he agreed to stay away from Reneem. This had no impact, however. Although the police were frequently called to intervene and Reneem would tell them that she felt like she was in danger, she often declined to take it any further than that. A year would pass and things would only get more dangerous for Reneem. In early August 2018, with the help of her mother, Reneem obtained a non-molestation order against him after Janbaz broke into Kaula's home and smashed Reneem's phone up. Her aunt said that Reneem had finally found her strength and told the solicitor everything, from start to finish. The court injunction was filed on the 16th of August 2018. This prevented Janbaz from coming within 100 meters of her. Reneem finally felt like her life was back under her control. Her hard work had paid off, and she gained good results from college as well as her certificates and was excited to start looking for jobs. Reneem and Kaula spent the day visiting family, shopping, and ending up in a shisha lounge in the evening. Little did they know, Janbaz had been following them all day in a van he had borrowed from his workplace. After hiding and watching them for a while, he walked up to the pair and an argument broke out. He snatched Reneem's phone from her and hit Kaula before she hit him back. The fight continued for a while with people looking on. Janbaz was eventually escorted out of the restaurant and set off in his van. He then drove to his father's supermarket and grabbed a 12-inch steak knife. After the fight at the shisha bar, Reneem called 999. She told police that despite the court order against him, Janbaz had followed her there and assaulted her and her mother. This court order, unfortunately, could not be found on the police's system. Reneem said that she felt her and her mother were unsafe and that they needed help. Where should they go and what should they do? After this, Reneem and Kaula were also asked to leave the restaurant as well, and they waited outside on the streets for the police to arrive. Half an hour later, she phoned the police again to say she had left the shisha lounge, and she and her mother were now on the way home. Raneem asked the police whether they were going to take any action and was told that they would need to see her first. While they were driving home, Janbaz returned to the shisha lounge armed with the knife and after realizing the pair had left, set off in his van looking for them. At 11:42, she made a third call asking where the officers were and that she was waiting outside of her house on North Down Road. Another call would go through. Police advised Raneem to go to her mother's house, lock the doors and call if Janbaz turned up there. In a final call just after midnight, police phoned Raneem to say that the officers couldn't get out that night and they would see her at 8 a.m. She expressed concern that the matter was going to be left until far too late, begging them to see her. In that moment, while the phone call was still connected, Kaula started screaming as she noticed Janbaz coming out of the bushes towards them. Raneem says repeatedly, "He's here. I can see him." Janbaz launched at Raneem and began stabbing her in a frenzied attack. Kaula jumped in to try and protect her daughter, but Janbaz turned the knife on her as well. Raneem's half-sister and stepfather, Muhammad, came running out after hearing the screams, only to see the women lying on the ground and Janbaz running away. In the next few minutes, authorities poured onto the streets. There was nothing that could be done, and both Raneem and Kaula were pronounced dead at the scene. The head of the West Midlands Police CID described the scene as one of the most brutal and heartrending he had seen in 150 homicides in all his years on the job. Neighbors were now coming out of their homes reporting to have been woken up by the noise, with some saying they saw a man driving away in a white van. Janbaz had discarded his bloody clothes and knife before changing into a red jacket and shaving off his beard. Just a short while after attacking Raneem and Kaula, he was captured on CCTV in a takeaway called Pepe's on Beardwood High Street, calmly ordering some food. The only suspect police had was Janbaz Taran, and a huge manhunt was now underway to find him. Police were using everything at their disposal to try and track him down, including a £5,000 reward, and they dramatically increased their presence around certain areas to, in their words, provide community reassurance. Janbaz's van was soon located and forensic analysis quickly began on it. Police searched several addresses linked to Janbaz seizing computer equipment and mobile phones, but he was still nowhere to be found. He would be on the run for 4 days and was now one of Britain's most wanted criminals. Soon, a member of the public saw him and tipped off the police. Officers detained him in an alleyway using pepper spray and finally, they had Janbaz in handcuffs. The amount of phone calls Raneem had made to the police that night was concerning to the public, and people wanted answers as to why no one came out. The police said they had done their absolute best. On the 8th of September 2018, Raneem and Kaula were laid to rest in a joint service attended by hundreds. Following brief submissions by prosecutors Annabelle Darlow QC and Jody Anderson, Judge Paul Farah QC told Janbaz, "You will be back here before the court on October 30th for a plea and trial preparation hearing. Your trial has been fixed for March 4th next year." But in December 2018, Janbaz appeared at Birmingham Crown Courts. He pleaded guilty to both murders. The judge described the murders as significantly premeditated and sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years that he must serve before he can even be considered for parole. The Independent Office on Police Conduct started an investigation into the actions of the West Midlands Police on that night, after the police referred themselves to them. Muhammad Salim said his wife was a wonderful woman who worked hard to make the home a welcoming, happy place filled with love and good memories. Renee Modi came to England looking for a better life for her and her baby boy. She was met with an awful end after fighting for her freedom and life for so long. Nor said of her niece, just by looking at her, people forget their bad day. She was always smiling, full of life and socializing. Nor now cares for her son and talks to him about Raneem all the time. She is determined to not let her niece and sister's death be in vain and works hard to raise awareness for domestic violence and abusive and coercive relationships. The case of Natalie Holloway, 18-year-old Natalie Holloway, who disappeared while on a trip to Aruba, an island in the southern Caribbean Sea near Venezuela. In May 2005, a group of 124 students from Mountain Brook High School, accompanied by 7 chaperones, traveled to Aruba to celebrate the start of their adult lives. The students stayed at the Holiday Inn and had access to beaches, palm trees, restaurants, and local entertainment venues. They spent 5 unforgettable days on the island, enjoying themselves with swimming, sunbathing, dancing, and partying. However, on the day of their return, Natalie Holloway was nowhere to be found. Her belongings, phone and passport were still in the hotel, but she had vanished. Her mother, Elizabeth Twitty, was the first to raise the alarm and reported her concerns to one of the chaperones. Elizabeth recalled that at that moment her heart sensed something was wrong as her daughter was obedient and always stayed in touch. Natalie's mother and stepfather immediately flew to Aruba to search for her. Upon arriving, Elizabeth was able to find out more information than the police did as the authorities seemed uninterested in starting a search. The police told Elizabeth that cases like this are not rare, and that people often miss their planes or get lost in bars or with new acquaintances. However, Elizabeth knew her daughter and was convinced that something was seriously wrong. Natalie Holloway was last seen leaving Carlos and Charlie's nightclub with 17-year-old Jan, a local regular who had offered her a drink. They left with 2 other young men in a silver Honda car. For hours later, Natalie's mother, Elizabeth, contacted the police again with concerning information, leading to the detention of the trio. Initially, Vandersloot denied knowing Natalie, but later admitted to leaving the bar with her. They drove around, visited the beach, and then dropped her off near the hotel. His friends Deepak and SES Kalpo confirmed his account. Natalie was born on October 21, 1986, in Clinton, Mississippi, to Elizabeth and David Edward Holloway. Her parents loved each other dearly, but divorced after 13 years. Natalie and her brother stayed with their mother, but their father remained supportive emotionally and financially. In 2000, Elizabeth remarried to George Twitty, and Natalie moved to Mountain Brook. The move was smooth, and she made new friends easily due to her sociable nature. Her family was devout, attending church every Sunday, which influenced Natalie's upbringing. Relatives remembered her as kind, modest, and beautiful with a radiant smile. Natalie was an excellent student, engaged in dance and participated in various clubs. She dreamed of pursuing a career in medicine and had chosen a local university for a substantial scholarship. At the time, she had promising life prospects and was excited about an upcoming trip. Elizabeth believed her daughter was unlikely to trust a stranger or get into a car with him. Surveillance footage from the bar confirmed her suspicions, showing Natalie's behavior changed after drinking a beverage offered by Jan, suggesting she was under the influence of some substance. The staff at Carlos and Charlie spoke well of Natalie, but Vandersloot had a questionable reputation, often behaving poorly, indulging in gambling and consuming forbidden substances. He had previously recorded and uploaded videos of his exploits to the internet, but was never held accountable due to his father's influence as a well-known lawyer aiming for a judgeship. The disappearance of Natalie sparked a nationwide search, with the island authorities launching an extensive operation to find her. Volunteers, divers, and specially trained dogs were deployed to cover a vast area. The government even declared a public holiday, and 50 Marines combed the coastline. An airplane equipped with thermal imaging scanned over 40 kilometers of terrain, but Natalie seemed to have vanished into thin air. On June 30th, investigators discovered that there was no footage of Natalie entering a building, which contradicted the statements of Jan and the Kalpo brothers. The police brought them in for questioning again, and this time the younger Wanda Slut unexpectedly changed his story. He claimed to have dropped Natalie off at a location without surveillance, not near the hotel, and added that he saw a figure in black moving towards her. Hotel security staff who were on duty that night were detained, with investigators suspecting they might have intercepted Natalie on her way. On June 9th, detectives arrested the suspicious trio, and one of the security guards shared a cell with the Kalpo brothers. The guard learned a crucial detail. Sutish confessed that he and Deepak had lied to cover for their friend, leaving Jan alone with Natalie on the beach. The security guards were released on June 13th, and on June 17th, another suspect, Steve Gregory Cruz, a DJ, was detained. The police suspected his involvement in Natalie's disappearance. On June 22nd, Paulus Vandersloot was brought in for questioning and detained, but he was released on June 26th due to insufficient evidence. Jan offered a third explanation of the events, trying to shift the blame onto the Kalpo brothers, claiming he parted ways with Natalie near his home, and she left with him. However, his story was not taken seriously. A lawyer defended Sutish and Deepak, and on July 4th, after a brief trial, the Kalpo brothers were released. Jan Vandersloot, born on August 6, 1987, in Arnhem, Netherlands, was one of 3 brothers in a large family. He was a good student, excelled in sports, and planned to attend St. Leo University in Florida. Jan's childhood was marked by a strained relationship with his mother Anita, an art teacher, who considered him an incubator liar. He grew up rebellious, often ran away from home, and fell in with a bad crowd, developing a penchant for gambling. Despite this, he presented himself as cool and fearless to his friends. Locals were suspicious of Jan's lenient attitude, fearing it would lead to trouble. However, he was popular among girls and often took advantage of them. As the investigation into the suspects continued, the search for Natalie persisted. U.S. authorities closely monitored the progress and provided substantial financial support. Despite the scrutiny, the Holloway family was desperate to find their daughter alive and announced a monetary reward, which initially started at $50,000. As hope dwindled, the reward increased to $1 million. Additionally, $100,000 was offered for information leading to the location of her remains, which later increased to $250,000. During this time, the investigation hit several dead ends. However, after the reward announcement, new witnesses emerged. One claimed to have seen Jan with the Calpo brothers at a local night spot between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Another witness claimed to have seen several suspicious men hiding a woman's body at a dump on the afternoon of May 30th. However, these statements led the investigation astray, and after numerous checks, their claims were not corroborated. On August 26th, the police detained the Calpo brothers and another young man. But these actions were unrelated to the case. The arrest was more about intimidation and an attempt to get them to talk. Ultimately, on September 3, 2005, all four were released on bail. A week and a half later, the court removed all restrictions and prohibitions, as none provided any substantial leads to the investigation. Jan Vandersloot was detained for 3 months, but after his release, he sought to capitalize on his notoriety by giving interviews and appearing on TV shows. In these appearances, he claimed that Natalie Holloway had flirted with him and offered to have sex, but he declined because he didn't have a condom. However, during one show he became aggressive and threw a glass at the interviewer. A journalist who was targeted by Jan's glass-throwing incident held a grudge against him and worked with authorities to place a bug in a friend's car. The bug captured Jan confessing to witnessing Natalie's death. He claimed that they had sex on the beach, but afterward she began shaking, lost consciousness, and eventually died. Jan and a friend then disposed of her body at sea. Despite this confession, Jan managed to avoid consequences by denying the statement on another TV show, claiming he had only told his friend what he wanted to hear. In 2007, Jan released a book, The Case of Natalie Holloway, My Own Account of Her Disappearance in Aruba, in which he presented his side of the story, and apologized to Natalie's family. By this time, the official investigation had largely stalled. In 2008, 2 new witnesses came forward. The first reported seeing Jan and his father on the beach around 4 a.m. on the night Natalie went missing. The younger Vandersloot appeared disheveled, and the witness saw him arguing with his father in a car before they drove away. However, Paulus Vandersloot had an alibi for the night in question. The second witness was Jan's former girlfriend, who recalled that Jan had once made a suspicious comment about being able to dispose of someone's body. However, this was not considered a strong lead, given Jan's history of lying and exaggeration. Jan and the Calpo brothers were detained multiple times, but released due to lack of evidence. The Holloway family hired a private investigator, who, along with Natalie's father, conducted their own investigation, interviewing locals and searching the landfill. During this time, they uncovered several oversights by the local police, including failure to interview Natalie's classmates or hotel room neighbors. It was also discovered that someone had used Natalie's hotel keys several times on the night of her disappearance, and that her mobile phone and toothbrush had been left behind. A male DNA was found on her toothbrush. The investigation ultimately revealed that the Aruban authorities had been negligent in their handling of the case. Jan's father, Paulus, died of a heart attack in 2010, reportedly due to the stress and shame of his son's actions. After his father's death, Jan attempted to blackmail the Holloway family, offering to reveal the truth for $250,000. The family agreed to meet with him and paid in advance of $25,000. During the meeting, provided yet another version of events, claiming that Natalie had resisted his advances, which enraged him, and that he had pushed her, causing her to hit her head and lose consciousness. He then buried her body in a building foundation. However, the police investigation revealed that Jan's claims were false, as the house he pointed to had long been built, and its foundation was fully set at the time of Natalie's disappearance. Jan fled to Peru with the money, but unfortunately, the consequences did not catch up with him immediately. On June 1, 2010, The body of 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez was discovered in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. She had been severely beaten, and the cause of her death was determined to be a neck fracture. Surveillance cameras quickly helped identify the criminal, and soon after, Jan was arrested and taken to the police station. He explained that he had met Stephanie at a casino, and after playing poker, they decided to continue their acquaintance in his hotel room. However, when Stephanie accessed his laptop and discovered his connection to Natalie Holloway's death, she became frightened and wanted to leave, realized what had alarmed her, became enraged and struck her until she died. Jan was captured on his way to Chile and confessed to the crime on the 4th day of his arrest. The news shocked residents in the U.S., especially as it occurred exactly 5 years after Natalie's disappearance. Elizabeth Twitty expressed her grief, noting that justice had finally been served, albeit at the cost of another life. Jan was sentenced to 28 years in prison on January 11, 2012, for the premeditated crime against Stephanie Flores Ramirez. He was also ordered to pay $75,000 in compensation to the Ramirez family. In 2014, Jan was transferred from Pedras Gordas prison to Calakpala prison, where he met a Peruvian woman who visited another inmate in 2010. They got married, but it turned out Jan was using her for his own purposes. He showed no signs of remorse or guilt for his actions. Meanwhile, in June 2011, David Holloway filed a petition in an Alabama court to have his daughter Natalie, who had gone missing in 2005, declared legally deceased. Natalie's mother opposed this, hoping that Jan would confess to the crime and face trial. After a hearing, Judge Alan King ruled in favor of the declaration on January 12, 2012. On June 8, 2023, Jan was extradited to the United States and placed in Hoover City Jail in Alabama. The next day, he was charged with extortion and wire fraud, but he pleaded not guilty. However, on October 18, 2023, he entered a plea agreement admitting to murdering Natalie Holloway. He confessed to fatally bludgeoning her with a cinder block on May 30, 2005, and disposing of her body in the ocean for sharks to consume. Unfortunately, the confession made as part of the plea deal could not be used in court. Jan was sentenced to 20 years, which would run concurrently with his prison term in Peru. Natalie Holloway's disappearance remains one of the most notorious missing person cases in the U.S., and it is still an open case in Aruba. A series of cover-ups, corrupt deals, and bureaucratic delays effectively allowed the murder of an innocent young woman to go unpunished, despite global attention to the investigation. The case of Alison Bonilla. Alison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in Cartago, Costa Rica. She is an only child living with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. In addition to her mother, her grandparents, Ramon and Marjorie, and her aunt, Samara, also helped raise Alison. Alison's father left the family shortly after her birth. He chose to be with another woman who was pregnant. He did not want to play a role in Alison's life. Only once, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer, did he ask to see his daughter, and Yendri allowed him to. It is worth noting that his second family did not know about Alison's existence. Alison and her mother, Yendri, had a particularly close relationship. For Alison, Yendri was not only a mother, but also a father. Therefore, Alison often gave her mother gifts on Father's Day. Their relationship went beyond the typical mother-daughter relationship. Alison felt comfortable sharing everything with Yendri without fear of being misunderstood or judged. Despite not having a father, Alison did not feel lonely or abandoned. She had a large family and enjoyed spending time with them. She also attended church regularly every Sunday. Relatives described Alison as a kind, outgoing, and friendly girl. In photos, she always looked happy, and there was no sign of sadness or longing in her eyes. Alison had always dreamed of becoming a model. She decided to drop out of 8th grade to focus on makeup classes, thinking that combining the two was too difficult. She did not want to waste time on something that would not help her achieve her goals. After that, Alison started looking for a job to help her mother pay the bills, but did not receive any responses from the places she applied. This made her very sad. Her mother, Yendri, realized that her daughter would have difficulty finding a job due to her limited education, so she encouraged Alison to take evening classes. At age 18, Alison enrolled in Liceo Enrique Geyer, a few miles from home. During this time, she completed a pastry course and began practicing. Alison made delicious cakes and desserts that were loved by everyone in the neighborhood. This helped her find a way to make money from her baking talent. Allison had a boyfriend named Harold Surisolano who lived in Cochi, a district in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. Usually, Allison stayed home with her mother in the morning, then met Harold, and then went to evening school at 6 o'clock. She often returned home late by bus. The route from the bus stop to her house was dangerous, dark, and deserted. Therefore, Allison always informed her mother of her location, and sometimes her mother picked her up at the bus stop or halfway. On March 4, 2020, Allison went to her mother's nail salon, then visited her classmate pal for about 15 minutes. They arrived at school at 6 p.m. and separated because they had different classes. Allison arrived at school and waited in an empty classroom for about 15 minutes before realizing that her classes had been canceled for the day. Instead of going home right away, she decided to visit her aunt who lived near the school. However, her aunt was not home. Allison then decided to go to her boyfriend Harold's house. When she arrived, she learned that Harold was at work but would be back soon. Harold's mother invited Allison inside to wait. When Harold returned, the family had dinner together, talking about a variety of topics and discussing future plans. After dinner, Harold excused himself for a moment, saying that he had urgent business to attend to but would be back soon. At 8:15 p.m., Allison left Harold's house without waiting for him to return. This set off a chain of events that would become nationally known. Harold returned home about 5 minutes later and, seeing that Allison had left, texted her to ask where she was and offered to give her a ride home on his bike. Allison replied immediately that she had already arrived at the bus stop. While waiting for the bus, she texted her friend, Pa, to ask if Pa's cousin could give her a ride home on his bike. However, Pa's cousin refused because his bike was a special type and not suitable for two people. It is unclear why Allison did not ask her boyfriend for help. She may have been angry with him or did not want to bother him. Allison got off the bus at 8:43 p.m. Her house was about a mile away. Feeling anxious and scared, she texted her mother to pick her up. At 8:45 p.m., Allison texted her boyfriend and mother that two suspicious men had gotten out of a car and were following her. She decided to run home to avoid them. The road Allison was on was dangerous, poorly lit, and had few people. There was only one security camera there, which captured a blurry image that could have been Allison. Allison's mother, Yendrai, went to the bridge half a mile from their home to pick up her daughter but did not see her. She tried to stay calm, thinking that Allison might have gone back to the bus stop for safety. However, she did not find her there either. She finally thought that Allison had not seen her and had gone home on her own. When Yendrai returned home, she found that Allison was not there. She immediately called relatives and friends to ask for help in the search. About 30 minutes later, Harold woke up and received a call from his Aunt Samara saying Allison was missing. He tried to contact Yendrai, but was unsuccessful. 3 hours later, Yendrai reported Allison missing to the police, and the search began. Luckily, Yendrai had the last photo of Allison in the clothes she was wearing. Police checked several locations, from the bus stop to Allison's house, Catsi Lake, and the nearby hydroelectric dam. On March 5, 2020, police found their first clue, Allison's glasses in the grass about a mile from her house. However, Allison seemed to have disappeared without a trace. 8 days later, they discovered Allison's identification on a coffee plantation. This was surprising because they had checked the area several times before. What was even more suspicious was that her ID was placed in such a conspicuous and clean location, as if someone had intentionally placed it there to mislead the investigation or hide something. 15 days after Allison went missing, Yendrai received a call from Allison's father. Instead of showing concern or offering help, he said that Allison was missing because she was too beautiful. Shocked by these insensitive words, Yendrai immediately hung up the phone, unable to believe what she had just heard. For a long time, the family, police, and volunteers continued to search for Allison. Every Sunday, they hung up posters with her picture. One day, they decided to paint messages on the streets, recreating Allison's journey from the intersection to the bridge, where she was believed to have disappeared. They also put up posters on roadside poles to attract the attention of passersby. At the same time, the police received an important clue. A man came to the police station and said that he knew Allison and had seen her on the night she disappeared. According to the man, at around 8:30 p.m. on March 4th, he left his home on his motorbike to pick someone up. On the way, he saw Allison and a burgundy two-door BMW parked next to her. He turned around to check on the situation and realized it was his cousin's BMW. He was 100% sure of this because the car had distinctive bright yellow headlights. Another witness also confirmed to the police that he had seen the same BMW near where Allison went missing that evening. The car belonged to Nelson Sanchez Urania, 28, nicknamed Sukia. Locals called him that because they believed he was a member of a gang in the area. In fact, Nelson and Allison knew each other. Their families had been acquainted for a long time and had lived in the same neighborhood for a while. However, according to Allison's mother, they had only interacted with Nelson a few times. It was just a normal neighborly relationship, not a close friendship. One day, Nelson offered to give Allison and her cousins a ride home. She agreed because it was morning, she was not alone, and she thought Nelson was a good person. On March 2nd, 2020, 2 days before Allison went missing, Nelson contacted her via Facebook. He sent a message asking Allison to answer some questions. On her cousin's advice, Allison agreed to answer them. Next, Nelson asked Allison about her feelings for him. Specifically, he wanted to know if Allison liked him. Allison was confused by Nelson's sudden question, as they were not close and barely knew each other. When Allison asked why, Nelson explained that he did not have a negative opinion of her, but wanted to know if she thought badly of him. Allison reassured Nelson that she did not hate him and that everything was normal between them. Nelson thanked her and said goodbye. Police searched Nelson's home and seized his car, cell phone, and computer. Investigators found shocking images of women being abused on his phone. When they inspected the car, they found that it had been thoroughly cleaned with car polish. However, the front driver's seat carpet and trunk carpet had been removed. Police found hair and blood on the trunk lid and sent samples to a lab for analysis. After examining the exterior of the car, police used a police dog to search for traces. The dog detected possible blood on the 2 front seats and in the trunk. To confirm, the police used a luminol test, a chemical that reacts with hemoglobin in the blood. The results showed that there were many blood stains on the car's interior, despite the owner's efforts to remove them with cleaning products. While waiting for the results from the lab, Nelson remained free but was closely monitored by the police. They monitored his every move to prevent him from leaving the city or the country. Although Yendre repeatedly requested his arrest, the police did not have enough evidence to do so. Therefore, Nelson continued to live freely without being prosecuted for many months. Yendre believed that Allison had been kidnapped for ransom. She tried to stay calm and hoped that her daughter was still alive. In preparation for Allison's return, Yendre kept her daughter's room as it was, not cleaning or rearranging the furniture. She even bought Allison a gift. Yendre told the press, "I will continue to do so, as long as there is no evidence that she is dead. I still believe that my daughter is alive and will return home." Laboratory test results confirmed that the hair and blood found in Nelson's car belonged to Allison. The police immediately arrested Nelson. Later, his ex-girlfriend told the police that Nelson had never physically abused her, but had put a lot of mental pressure on their relationship. Specifically, he forbade her from contacting her friends and using the internet. According to her, Nelson only wanted to have a sexual relationship with her. His previous boss revealed that he was very irresponsible at work and even stole about $11,000. Additionally, his landlord said an ex-girlfriend had broken up with him because she was tired of paying his debts. She described him as a very spoiled man. After that, Nelson confessed to his crimes against Allison. He said that on the night of Allison's disappearance, he found her walking alone on a deserted road. Taking advantage of the late hour and their acquaintance, Nelson offered to give Allison a ride. She agreed and got into the car without suspicion. However, instead of taking her home, Nelson drove to a remote coffee plantation and forced Allison out of the car. Nelson violently attacked her, knocking off her glasses and leaving her nearly unconscious. He dragged her to a nearby abandoned house, where he raped and brutally beat her. Nelson then tied her hands with cloth and duct tape to the front seat of his car. Finally, he stuffed her into the trunk of the car and drove to a dumpster in San Geronimo, Cache. There, the killer pushed Allison off a cliff into a pile of trash below. He justified his heinous actions by saying that he was under the influence of drugs. He also admitted that he had long been obsessed with Allison, and when he saw her that night, he decided it was his chance to carry out his dark intentions. Surprisingly, Nelson later recanted his initial statement, accusing the police of coercing him into confessing. However, the authorities had enough evidence to charge him despite his denials. The suspect could face a maximum sentence of 35 years in prison. In the early morning of September 4th, a search party went to the San Ono landfill to look for Allison's body. However, because the area was large and difficult to access, Finding Allison's remains was an extremely difficult task. Moreover, it had been 6 months since Allison went missing. Just 25 days after Allison confessed, the police discovered a number of important pieces of evidence. They found human bone fragments, including a spine, ribs, part of the pelvis, and a femur. They also found pieces of clothing that Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared, along with a pair of sneakers with studs inside. All of these clues were sent for testing and thorough analysis by the police. Jose Francisco Herrera, the suspect's defense attorney, questioned the authenticity of the evidence because it was found by volunteers, not professional police. He also said that the discovery of the remains coincided with the time his client declared his innocence, which was suspicious. Rodrigo Era, the attorney representing Allison's family, on the other hand, criticized the suspect's change of testimony, saying that it undermined the credibility of the official investigation. On October 5, 2020, experts confirmed that the remains found belonged to Allison. Because only a partial body was found, they were unable to determine the exact cause of death. However, examination of the remains revealed multiple fractures that appeared after death, suggesting she may have fallen from a great height. Her clothes were torn and her sneakers had bite marks, suggesting a possible animal attack. This would explain why the remains were found scattered in different areas of the landfill. Allison's mother, Yendrai, is furious with the police for not listening and acting promptly. She believes that if they had arrested Nelson sooner, he would have confessed and Allison's body would have been found in better condition. This is an irreparable loss for the family. Despite the terrible pain she is enduring, Yendrai finds some solace in saying, "My daughter is in a better place now, where no one can hurt her anymore." The trial of Nelson took place on July 19th. Harold, Allison's boyfriend, was a key witness in the case. According to Harold's testimony, on the afternoon of March 4, 2020, at approximately 6:30 p.m., he returned home and found Allison there with her mother. Harold then left for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. When he returned, he discovered that Allison had left without saying anything. While Allison was on her way home, Harold texted her repeatedly. As soon as she got off the bus, Allison texted Harold to say that 2 men were following her. Concerned for her safety, Harold suggested that she take a taxi and promised to pay for it. However, Allison refused twice and said that she would run home. Harold did not receive any further response from Allison after that text message. According to his explanation, he only informed his mother of the situation. He did not contact Allison's mother, Yendrai, because his phone battery died. He then fell asleep for about 30 minutes. It was Allison's aunt who called him to inform him that his girlfriend was missing. Since then, he said he has been worried and tried to call Allison several times, but all the calls went to voicemail. He also could not be reached via WhatsApp messages. Harold said he joined the search party for a few days, but then had to stop because he felt unwell and had to go to work. He really wished things had gone differently. If he could go back in time, he would have taken Allison home that night. However, unfortunately, what happened cannot be changed. On August 18, 2021, the court sentenced Nelson to 18 years in prison for taking the life of Allison. He could have received twice the sentence, but the judge pointed out that there was no evidence to confirm that Nelson knew the route and time Allison would return home and that he planned to attack her. Furthermore, due to the condition of Allison's remains, there was no evidence that Nelson forced her to have sex. The story does not end there. Allison's family was not satisfied with the original sentence, arguing that it was not commensurate with the crime. In 2022, they successfully appealed, and the court decided to retry the case. As a result, on September 28, 2023, Nelson was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Allison's family's lawyer emphasized that Nelson acted in a cruel and inhumane manner and took advantage of the trust of the victim and her relatives. The court ruled that Nelson's actions were intentional. Nelson used his long-standing relationship with Allison to commit the crime. The criminal court also took into account Nelson's lack of remorse for his actions. Although still hurt and angry, the victim's family was relieved by the new verdict. The decision ended a painful chapter in their lives that lasted more than 3 years and put an end to this nightmare. Allison's family created a memorial at the spot where her body was found. They placed a cross, flowers, and a small altar with a photo of Allison and a statue of the Virgin Mary. Allison's case has caused a stir in Costa Rican media and social media. It has also led to many marches in memory of Allison and other women who have been victims of similar violence. Heartbreaking case of Heather Elvis. Heather Rell Elvis was born on June 30, 1993 in Horry County, South Carolina to Terry and Debbie Elvis. She was described as a determined, vibrant, and free-spirited individual with a big personality. Heather enjoyed doing makeup and aspired to pursue it as a career. She was a talented, cheerful, and seemingly happy 20-year-old girl. Heather was very artistic and often shared her thoughts and interests on social media. She was known to be somewhat rebellious, living her life the way she wanted, without caring much about what others thought of her. After graduating from St. James High School in Mulls Inlet in 2011, and eager to experience her independence, her parents allowed her to move into an apartment in Myrtle Beach with her best friend Brianna. To support herself while studying cosmetology, Heather had 2 part-time jobs, one at the House of Blues in North Myrtle Beach and the other at a Scottish-themed restaurant called the Tilted Kilt in Myrtle Beach. She had a good job, great friends, and a tight-knit family, and everything in her life seemed to be on track. However, like every 20-year-old girl, she had secrets and things that her family did not know about and would not find out about until it was too late. One day in the summer of 2013, Heather was working her regular shift at the Tilted Kilt when an older man caught her eye. This man was Sidney Mora, the restaurant's maintenance worker. Sidney was a 37-year-old married man with 3 children. His wife Tammy was a 40-year-old stay-at-home mother and a part-time travel agent whom he had been married to since 1997. Sidney owned his own maintenance company and would come to the restaurant to repair things in the kitchen. It was no secret that Heather had a crush on Sidney, even though he was much older, and the two of them would engage in harmless flirting at work. Heather would tell her friend Brianna about their interactions and how smitten she was with this man. Heather, who was also very active on her social media accounts, was open about expressing her feelings towards Sidney. It became clear that Sidney was also attracted to Heather, and the two began a romantic relationship. Sidney would often bring Heather coffee and bagels when she was at work, even on his days off. They would text each other frequently, and the relationship soon became physical. Heather was deeply in love with Sidney. She told her sister how much they loved each other and how they envisioned a future together. Throughout the affair, Heather was aware that Sidney had a wife. However, Sidney had told her that he was in an open marriage and was no longer in love with Tammy. He even claimed that Tammy had a boyfriend of her own and they were only living together for financial reasons and for the sake of the kids. Being young and naive, Heather believed every word. Her friends didn't approve of their relationship because Sidney was 17 years older than Heather. And on top of that, he was a married man. He had been married for 15 years to his wife, 40-year-old Tammy. The affair was not a secret at Heather's workplace, and she would often be teased by her colleagues. One of the girls also phoned the restaurant posing as Tammy, looking for Heather. Heather panicked and left work straight away, thinking that Tammy was going to show up. The affair lasted until September 2013, when Heather tweeted, Once upon a time an angel and a devil fell in love. It did not end well, referring to her relationship with Sidney. Tammy found out about the affair, though it's unclear how she discovered it. People close to Heather said that once Tammy became aware of the affair, it was chaotic. Soon after discovering her husband's affair with the young waitress, Tammy called Heather and demanded that she end the relationship. Tammy then put Sidney on the phone, and he proceeded to tell Heather that she meant nothing to him, that it was over, and that she was just someone who spread their legs, among other insults that greatly undermined Heather's confidence and self-worth. Over the next few weeks, she tried to focus on rebuilding herself and directing her sights on her goals and work. Tammy, however, was only just getting started. Tammy forced Sidney to get her name tattooed above his crotch. She would also handcuff him to the bed at night so that he could not sneak out. Over the next few weeks, continued to send nasty texts to Heather, and she even once called Heather 40 times in a single day. Heather believed that taunting Tammy was the best way to deal with the situation, saying things like, "Why are you texting me? You should be worried about your husband." Tammy would take it a step further and send Heather pictures of both Tammy and Sidney in bed together, getting intimate. It was also reported that Sidney texted Heather again, saying that Tammy wasn't entitled to feel the way she did about the affair and act the way she did because she too had a lover. But this turned out to be a lie. They both agreed to call it quits because nothing good was coming from it. Heather, on the other hand, told Sidney that she wanted Tammy to stop calling the restaurant because she lost hours of work and was sent home because Tammy kept calling. Heather and Sidney last saw each other on November 5th after they agreed to end their relationship. Heartbroken, but remaining determined to move on from the situation, Heather continued to work on herself with those close to her commenting on how she had got her smile back. Things also started to look up for Heather when she was offered a job in a beauty salon, and she was one step closer to her dream job. As for the texts and calls from Tammy, Heather began to get used to them and continued to ignore them, thinking that Tammy would eventually get bored and move on. On November 19th, Sydney and Tammy decided to buy a brand new black Ford F-150 and drive to California with their children to visit Disneyland as a way to rekindle their romance, whereby the trip lasted 3 weeks. Meanwhile, despite Heather's life taking a turn for the better, it would not be long before those around her began to notice that she was gaining weight. So much so that she had to be given a new uniform at work as her usual one no longer fit. Heather went from having a size A cup size on her bra to a size C cup, and she also went from a medium-sized skirt to a large. These are all changes that are typically associated with someone being pregnant. Finally, Heather took a test at work one day, and it came back invalid. It is not known for certain whether or not Heather was pregnant, but it was considered a very strong possibility given the changes in her physical appearance and the fact that she was known to be having a very intimate relationship with Sydney Moore. Her confidence was coming back, and she organized a date with a guy who was closer to her age that she'd been talking to for quite a while. Things were looking good for Heather. On December 17, 2013, Heather went out on a date with Stephen Caldy. They didn't have a specific plan, but wanted to spend some time getting to know each other better. They went out to eat and then drove around looking at Christmas lights, which Heather loved doing during the holidays. Stephen then took Heather to Inlet Mall and taught her how to drive his stick-shift truck. He even took a picture of her trying to drive his car. Heather sent this picture to her best friend, Brianna, and her dad, Terry, who she lived with. The date started at 10 p.m. and ended around 1 a.m. when Stephen dropped Heather off at her apartment. They made plans to meet again the next day for a second date. Regrettably, this marked the last time Heather Elvis was seen. Shortly after returning to her apartment, she received an unexpected call from Sydney Moore, with whom she hadn't been in touch for weeks. During the 4-minute conversation from a payphone, Sydney apologized to Heather, professed his love for her, and revealed that he had left Tammy to be with her. At 1:44 a.m., Heather called her roommate, Brianna, who was away visiting relatives in a distressed state. She informed Brianna about Sydney's confession of love. Sydney initially denied this call until evidence from CCTV footage proved otherwise. Brianna advised Heather to carefully consider the situation and not jeopardize the progress she had made. Heather mentioned she would reflect on it, do some online research, and then try to sleep, although she found it difficult to rest that night. At 2:29 a.m., Heather attempted to contact the number Sydney had called multiple times before, but no one answered. At 3:16 a.m., Heather tried calling Sydney's cell phone, once again with no response. Heather persisted and dialed Sydney's cell phone again, managing to connect this time. The conversation lasted just over 4 minutes, though its content remains unknown. Following the call, Heather drove to Peachtree Boat Landing, a location merely 3 miles away from Sydney and Tammy's residence. Sydney initially denied this call, only admitting to it when presented with Heather's phone records by the police. He claimed to have spoken to her, directing her to cease contacting him. Heather reached Peachtree Boat Landing at 3:38 a.m. and attempted to contact Sydney several times, but received no response. 2 CCTV cameras recorded a vehicle resembling Sydney and Tammy's, moving from their residence towards Peachtree Boat Landing the next evening. Heather's green Dodge Intrepid was discovered parked at Peachtree Landing on the Waccamaw River by a local officer. The authorities questioned Heather's father, Terry, as the vehicle was registered under his name. Upon inspecting the car, they noticed that Heather's keys, ID, purse and phone were missing. Terry was permitted to take the car back home. Despite Terry's repeated attempts to reach Heather, his calls went unanswered. When the police visited Heather's apartment, she was not present and she did not report to work. The search for the missing Heather Elvis had commenced. Sydney and Tammy were suspected of involvement in Heather's case based on texts, phone calls, and public statements. They were arrested on February 21, 2014, for kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and indecent exposure. After spending 11 months in prison, they were released in 2015 on a $100,000 bond each. The murder charges were dismissed in March 2016, and the kidnapping charges were pending. The indecent exposure charges were dropped on June 20, 2016. Sydney's trial for the kidnapping of Heather Elvis began. It was revealed in court that Heather may have been pregnant. Detectives found out that Sydney bought a pregnancy test and cigars at Walmart. Later, Sydney called Heather from a payphone and arranged to meet her. Sydney claimed the pregnancy test was for Tammy as they were trying for a baby. However, Security footage showed them cleaning their car, burning rags, and having a receipt for a pregnancy test. The kidnapping charge against Sydney ended in a mistrial because the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. There was no evidence linking Sydney to Heather's murder. In August 2017, Sydney faced trial once more, this time for obstructing justice. He was convicted and given a 10-year prison sentence. Additionally, the prosecution intended to retry Sydney for kidnapping at a later date. In October 2018, Tammy was put on trial for kidnapping and conspiracy, 5 years after Heather's disappearance. It was revealed during the trial that Tammy was angry about her husband's affair with Heather, especially when rumors suggested that Heather might have been pregnant in December 2013. A family friend, Donald DeMarino, testified that he saw an image of Heather on Tammy's phone at a family gathering after Heather disappeared. According to Donald, Heather in the image did not seem able to move or speak, causing him distress and leading him to leave the event. Although the image was not shown in court and few details were provided, the prosecution's evidence, including this testimony, convinced the jury to find Tammy guilty in less than 2 hours. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison for both charges, with the possibility of parole after a set period. To this day, they have not revealed what occurred to Heather Elvis on that night in December 2013. Both have been attempting to challenge their convictions for years, claiming their innocence, but without success. Currently, Sydney, aged 47, is imprisoned at the high-security Lee Correctional Institution in Bishopville, with an expected release date of March 31, 2044. Tammy, aged 50, is at the medium-security Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, with an anticipated release date of May 9, 2043. Heather Elvis has never been found, and a tribute garden has been set up at Peachtree Boat Landing in dedication to her. Heather's disappearance left a void in the lives of her family and friends, and their pain, unanswered questions, and desire for closure became part of the story of Myrtle Beach. The community came together in search efforts and vigils, united by hope for answers. Heather's story touched hearts beyond the coastal town, highlighting the challenges of love and relationships. As we honor Heather Elise Elvis, let her memory remind us of life's fragility and the need for compassion and understanding. The case of Laci Peterson. Laci Rocha was born on May 4, 1975 to Sharon and Dennis, but her parents divorced when she and her older brother Brent were still young. After the divorce, Laci's mother married Ron, a dairy farmer, who became a father figure to her and played a significant role in her upbringing. Laci was a cheerful and outgoing person with an infectious smile and bubbly nature. She loved talking to people and was always eager to engage in conversations, which made her a natural attention seeker. She thrived in social situations and was known for her ability to light up a room with her presence. Growing up on a dairy farm, Laci developed a strong connection with nature. She spent much of her childhood exploring the outdoors and enjoying the beauty that surrounded her. One of her favorite activities was gardening with her mother, which became a source of joy and fulfillment for both of them. Laci's love for gardening would later influence her interests and career choices as an adult. Laci was a cheerleader at Thomas Downey High School, which was a great fit for her outgoing and bubbly personality. She made a strong impression on her school and became the ideal cheerleader. After graduating, Laci attended California Polytechnic University, where she studied ornamental horticulture due to her interest in plants and wildlife. Laci frequently visited a friend who worked at a restaurant in Morro Bay. It was there that she met Scott Peterson, a coworker of her friend. Laci was immediately attracted to Scott and was smitten. She took the initiative and gave Scott her phone number. Scott quickly reached out, and they surprisingly hit it off during their first conversation. Scott then asked Laci on their first date, a deep-sea fishing trip. However, things didn't go as planned for Laci, who ended up getting seasick. After a rocky start, Laci and Scott's relationship blossomed, and they eventually decided to live together. Before meeting Laci, Scott had aspirations to become a professional golfer, but as their relationship progressed, his focus shifted, and he chose to pursue a career in business instead. Laci graduated from Cal Poly in 1997, and Scott followed suit the next year. This milestone marked the beginning of a new era in their lives, full of promise and potential. On August 9, 1997, the couple tied the knot in Isla Valley, San Luis Obispo County. The beautiful resort setting provided a stunning backdrop for their special day. Surrounded by friends and family, they celebrated their love and solidified their commitment to each other. After getting married, Laci and Scott embarked on a new business venture, opening a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, California. The Shack, owned by Lassie and Scott, started off slowly, but eventually attracted a steady stream of customers, with weekends being particularly busy. After several successful years, the couple decided to sell the bar in February, seeking new opportunities despite its stable income. Following the sale, they moved to Lassie's hometown of Modesto, California, and purchased a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in an upscale neighborhood in October 2000. Lassie took on a part-time job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked for a European fertilizer company. Lassie devoted herself to supporting Scott, taking care of the home, cooking, and cleaning. She made sure their home was always warm and inviting. In February 2002, the couple received exciting news. Lassie was pregnant, and they were expecting a baby. Lassie and Scott were expecting a baby boy with a due date set for February 10, 2003. They had already chosen the name Connor for their unborn child. On December 24, 2002, Scott stated that he left their house at 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. Scott said he left Lassie at home on Christmas Eve morning with a busy day ahead of her. She was planning to watch a Martha Stewart show, clean the floor, bake Christmas cookies, and walk their dog Mackenzie at the park. However, one of their neighbors found Mackenzie wandering outside their home around 10:30 a.m. and returned the dog to their backyard. When Scott came home from fishing that afternoon, he said the house was empty, with Mackenzie in the yard, but no sign of Lassie. Her car was still parked in the driveway. Scott claimed he showered and washed his dirty fishing clothes as soon as he got home. After his shower, Scott realized Lassie was missing and became concerned. He called her mother and stepfather, Sharon and Ron, but they hadn't heard from her all day and were worried about her safety. As the day went on and Lassie remained missing, Scott and Sharon decided to report her disappearance to the police around 6 p.m. They stressed to the police how urgent it was to find Lassie, who was 7 months pregnant with their baby, Connor. The police then questioned Scott out about his whereabouts and activities on the day Lassie vanished. Scott told police he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles from his home in Modesto, where he lived with his pregnant wife, Lassie. However, from the start, police suspected foul play in Lassie's disappearance. Initially, police didn't treat Lassie's case as suspicious after Scott and his mother-in-law filed a missing person report. Lassie's family defended Scott, and the couple seemed perfect, making it hard to imagine Scott harming his wife. As the investigation continued, police grew suspicious of Scott. About a month after Lassie vanished, they made a stunning discovery. Scott had 2 secret affairs and a long-term relationship with Amber Fry, who contacted police on December 30, 2002 after learning Scott was a suspect in Lassie's disappearance. Amber said she met Scott on November 20, 2002 and thought he was single. 2 weeks before Lassie's disappearance, Scott told Amber that he was a widower and that the upcoming Christmas would be his first without his wife. This revelation raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if Scott had already planned to kill his pregnant wife. To gather evidence, the police asked Amber to make a recorded phone call to Scott, hoping to capture a potential confession. The police informed Lassie's family about Scott's infidelities, and it was when they showed Lassie's mother a photo of Scott and Amber together that she became convinced of his guilt. The search for Lassie was highly comprehensive due to the involvement of the police, her loved ones, and numerous volunteers. In the first 2 days alone, more than 900 people participated in the search efforts. During a press conference, a police officer working on Lassie's case raised concerns that she may not have left her house voluntarily on December 24, 2002. Lassie's disappearance sparked widespread media attention, with the tragic and intriguing tale of a beautiful young woman vanishing from her home on Christmas Eve, captivating the public's imagination. As the public sought answers and speculated about her disappearance, the spotlight on Lassie's case intensified. When Lassie Peterson vanished on December 24, 2002, a $25,000 reward was initially offered for information leading to her safe return. As the investigation yielded no leads, the reward was increased to $500,000 to boost awareness and gather more information. To keep Lassie's case in the public eye, posters were prominently displayed in Modesto, California, and a friend's husband created a website to spread the word. Months later, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog in Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in a marshy area. They found the decomposing body of a male infant. The next day, another person discovered the body of a pregnant woman on the east side of the bay shore, about a mile away from where the baby was found. On April 18, 2003, DNA tests confirmed that the bodies were indeed those of Lassie and her unborn son, Connor. Lassie and Connor were laid to rest at Burwood Cemetery. The autopsy revealed disturbing evidence. The baby had 1.5 loops of nylon tape around his neck and a significant cut on his body. Lassie's autopsy showed even more brutal injuries. 2 cracked ribs, her upper torso hollowed out with internal organs removed, and she was missing her head and limbs. The medical examiner concluded that the baby died in the womb and was expelled from Lassie's body after her death. Investigators from the FBI and Modesto Police Department searched the home of Scott and Lassie, looking for evidence of their involvement in her disappearance. The search turned up several crucial clues, including a hair found in Scott's pliers on his fishing boat. After analyzing the hair, the FBI matched it to Lassie's DNA. In addition to the home search, the FBI also thoroughly examined Scott's truck and warehouse, seeking any evidence linking him to Lassie's disappearance. The FBI searched Scott's boat and found a homemade anchor that he claimed was made from a 90-pound bag of concrete, which he had used to repair his driveway. However, the prosecution believed that Scott had created multiple anchors and used 4 of them to weigh down Lassie's body in San Francisco Bay. The bodies found in the bay were later identified as Lassie and Connor, leading to Scott's arrest near a golf course. Notably, Scott's appearance had changed significantly. His dark brown hair was now blonde. When arrested, Scott's vehicle was found to be packed with various items, including a large sum of cash, survival gear, and camping equipment. The police also discovered 4 cell phones and 2 driver's licenses, one belonging to Scott and the other linked to his brother. This evidence suggested to the police that Scott was attempting to flee the state. Scott's father offered an alternative explanation for the driver's license found in Scott's possession. According to his father, Scott had borrowed his brother's license to get a discount at a golf course. As for why Scott's car was packed, his father claimed it was because Scott was living out of his car to avoid the media, who were camping outside his house at the time. Scott's trial began in June 2004, a year after his arrest. During the opening arguments, the prosecution presented its case to the jury, arguing that Scott had killed Lassie because of his affair with Amber Frey. The prosecution highlighted Scott's suspicious behavior in the days leading up to and following Lassie's disappearance, pointing out inconsistencies in his statements to the police. Scott initially told the police he was fishing on the day Lassie went missing, but later told others he was golfing. The prosecution also noted that Scott asked the police if they had used cadaver dogs to search a park where Lassie was supposed to walk their dog, implying that Scott was aware of the potential crime scene and trying to cover his tracks. Scott's defense team presented a strong argument in court, highlighting that Scott's history of infidelity did not necessarily prove he was guilty of murdering his wife. They reasoned that Scott would not give up his life for someone he had only dated 4 times. The defense suggested that Lassie's hair might have been found in Scott's boat because she had visited the marina with him before. During the trial, 2 of Lassie's relatives testified that Scott showed no emotional response when his pregnant wife went missing. New evidence emerged when a realtor testified that Scott tried to sell their home in January, a month after Lassie's disappearance. Additionally, a salesman revealed that Scott traded in Lassie's car after she vanished. The prosecution viewed these events as incriminating evidence against Scott. Amber Frey, Scott's mistress, took the stand and shared details of their affair. The jury listened to secret recordings of Amber's phone calls with Scott, including one where he lied about being in Paris when he was attending a vigil for his missing wife. During the trial, a hydrologist and tide expert testified that it was possible for Lassie's body to have been dumped in the area where Scott claimed to be fishing on the day Lassie went missing. However, the defense team argued that there was a lack of credible evidence directly linking Scott to the crime. Their theory was that someone had kidnapped Lassie on Christmas Eve 2002, holding her captive until she gave birth to Connor, and then disposing of both bodies in the San Francisco Bay. The defense attorney emphasized that there was no concrete evidence to connect Scott directly to the crime, and that other suspects could have been responsible. A significant issue arose during the trial when a juror was removed and replaced with an alternate due to misconduct. The dismissed juror had conducted unauthorized research on the case, violating legal procedures. Additionally, the foreman of the jury asked to be removed, and it was determined that his removal was necessary to ensure a fair and just trial. On November 12, 2004, a California jury found Scott guilty of 2 murder counts: first-degree murder for killing his wife, Lassie, and second-degree murder for killing their unborn son, Connor. The charge of first-degree murder for Lassie's killing carried special circumstances because of the involvement of the fetus, making Scott eligible for the death penalty. After his conviction, the trial entered the penalty phase to determine his punishment. In this phase, the jury considered various factors, including Scott's prior criminal history, circumstances that aggravated the crime, and circumstances that mitigated it. The jury unanimously agreed that Scott should receive the death penalty. After reviewing the evidence, the judge upheld the jury's verdict. He concluded that Lassie's murder was cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous, which led to Scott being sentenced to death. As is automatic in such cases, the sentence was appealed, and the California Supreme Court heard the case in June 2020. During the appeal, Scott's lawyers presented several arguments. They claimed that some potential jurors were unfairly dismissed, that 2 jurors were improperly allowed onto Scott's boat, and that the trial should have been moved to a different county due to biased questionnaire results, which showed that almost half of the potential jurors thought Scott was guilty before the trial even started. The state countered that there was no evidence to support the claim that any juror was unfairly dismissed, and that none of the 12 jurors who ultimately decided Scott's fate were biased. In August 2020, the United States Supreme Court upheld Scott's conviction, but overturned his death sentence. In February 2004, a judge resentenced Scott to life in prison without parole, which led to his transfer from San Quentin State Prison to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. Around the same time, on April 1, 2004, President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, UVVA, into law. Lassie's mother and stepfather attended the signing ceremony. Lassie and Connor's law was designed to provide legal protection for unborn children in cases where their mothers were victims of violence. The legislation recognizes the unborn child as a separate legal entity from their mother, making it a crime to harm or kill the unborn child during an attack on a pregnant woman. The law acknowledges that an unborn child is a victim of violence and deserves the same rights and protections as any other human being. Melissa Brannon was born on April 12, 1984 in Texas. Not long after, her parents divorced and her mom decided to move to a small town called Lorton, Virginia. It was a quiet, peaceful place popular among families with kids. Melissa's mom, Tammy, got a job as an accountant at a local company and rented an apartment in a residential complex on the outskirts of town. The complex was made up of small apartment buildings. And one of the best things about it was all the regular events and activities organized for the residents and their kids. These events happen every Friday and on holidays, giving everyone a chance to get to know each other, creating a close-knit, friendly community. Melissa liked the place. She was 5 years old when they moved, and she spent most of her time playing outside with the other kids. She also loved taking part in the events because there were always plenty of fun and delicious food. On December 3rd, Complex held a Christmas event in a separate building with several halls. About 200 residents attended, enjoying dinner in small groups while their kids ran around having fun. Around 10 p.m., decided it was time to go home. She called for Melissa and asked her to grab their jackets while she said goodbye to some friends. Melissa also asked if she could take some chips home, and her mom agreed. A few minutes later, when Tammy had finished her goodbyes, she noticed Melissa still hadn't returned. She began checking every hall and even peeked into the hallway, but there was no sign of her daughter. Worried, she started asking the other guests if they'd seen Melissa, but no one had. With each passing minute, Tammy's concern grew, and soon word spread among the neighbors that Melissa had gone missing. Many people began helping Tammy search. They looked through the building, checked outside, but Melissa was nowhere to be found. Finally, Tammy decided to call the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at the complex. They immediately joined the search, combing through the entire area. By that time, even more neighbors had heard about Melissa's disappearance, and over 300 volunteers were now helping look for her. The police initially thought that Melissa might have wandered outside and gotten lost, but as the search went on, this theory seemed less and less likely. It was cold and dark outside, making it unlikely that a young girl could have gone far. Plus, Melissa was familiar with the complex, even at her age, so the officers doubted she would have wandered off in a completely different direction. What made the situation even more difficult was the fact that there was a large forest right behind the complex, so it was possible that Melissa had somehow ended up there and gotten lost. The search of the building where the Christmas event was held didn't yield many results. Melissa's jacket was missing, but there were no other clues to explain her disappearance. The only thing that stood out to the police was an open window in the boiler room. They considered the possibility that she might have climbed out through it, but even that didn't seem very likely. After failing to find Melissa, the police began interviewing everyone who had attended the event. None of the neighbors recalled seeing her leave the building or anyone taking her outside. Melissa's mom didn't notice anything strange that evening either. The officers also asked if she'd had any issues with anyone in the complex or noticed anything odd. But Tammy assured them that she got along well with everyone, and there had never been any signs of trouble. The police considered the possibility that Melissa's father could have taken her, as this is a common scenario in such cases, but they were able to confirm that he was in Texas and couldn't have been in another state at the time. With no other leads, the police decided to expand their search. Some officers headed into the forest behind the complex, while others continued checking the remaining buildings. Even though it was late into the night, hundreds of residents stayed out to help the police search for the missing girl. Unfortunately, the search led to nothing. There were no signs of Melissa in the forest or any of the numerous buildings in the complex. At that point, the police sent the volunteers home and decided to go door to door, speaking to every resident. Around 400 people lived there, and that night, officers talked to each one of them. No one had any idea where Melissa could have gone, so investigators asked them to think back on anything strange or suspicious that had happened around the complex, even if it didn't seem related to her disappearance. That's when they got their first interesting lead. Several women mentioned that Caleb Hughes, one of the complex's maintenance workers, had been acting inappropriately that night. He tried to flirt with them and made some very lewd comments, even though most of them were with their husbands. Hughes, who was 23 at the time, had also raised red flags with parents. Many of them noticed that he seemed to be paying an unusual amount of attention to their children during the evening. Hearing all these complaints, the police went back to Tammy and asked if she had noticed anything odd about Hughes. Tammy recalled that during the event, he had approached her several times to strike up a conversation about her daughter. At one point, he even offered to take Melissa to the restroom so Tammy wouldn't have to leave the party. All of this seemed suspicious to the investigators, so they decided to talk to Hughes. However, he was nowhere to be found, so the officers headed to his home. Hughes lived just a few miles from the complex, but when the police knocked on his door, he wasn't there either. Instead, his wife answered and told them that he hadn't come home that evening. The police left but returned a few hours later. By then, Hughes was back and said he had arrived home around 12:30 a.m. The officers quickly realized that Hughes had left the complex about 2.5 hours before returning home, which was odd since his commute should only have taken about 10 minutes. Hughes claimed that he had taken a longer route to stop at a store for a pack of beer, but the police were skeptical of his story. First, a quick stop still wouldn't account for nearly 3 hours. And second, there was a state law prohibiting alcohol sales after midnight. On top of that, Hughes couldn't provide a receipt for his purchase. The situation looked pretty suspicious, so the police asked Hughes to hand over the clothes he had worn to work that day. This is when things got even stranger. Hughes said that he had thrown his clothes into the washing machine as soon as he got home. Despite this, the officers convinced him to give them the clothing. To their surprise, they found that he had also washed his shoes. But that wasn't all. Parts of the soles had been cut off, and along with the clothes, there was a large knife sheath and a leather belt in the washing machine. The police asked where the knife was, but Hughes claimed he couldn't remember. With all of this suspicious behavior, the investigators began to seriously suspect Hughes' involvement in Melissa's disappearance. They took his clothes and brought them to the lab. When forensic experts applied luminol to his shoes, the chemical revealed traces of blood on them. But because he had already washed it, there wasn't enough left for a proper DNA sample, making it impossible to analyze. Detectives returned to Hughes' home and brought him in for questioning. During the long hours of interrogation, Hughes stuck to his story despite all the inconsistencies and suspicious evidence. He also claimed that he had no idea who Melissa was, what she looked like, or what had happened to her. The police knew he was lying since multiple witnesses, including Tammy, had seen him playing with Melissa and other children that evening. But when the detectives confronted him with that and said, "We know you're lying," Hughes calmly responded, "Prove it." Despite the detectives' suspicions, they didn't have enough solid evidence to arrest him, so Hughes was released. The next day, investigators ramped up the search operation, hoping to find either Melissa or more clues. That morning, they also decided to speak with Hughes' wife without him present, and she shared an interesting observation. Apparently, their relationship had been troubled, and she didn't trust him. Before Hughes left for the Christmas event, she checked the mileage on his car and remembered the reading. After he returned, she checked it again and noticed that he had driven 12 miles. This information was crucial for the police for two reasons. First, it didn't align with his story about a trip to the store that supposedly took 2.5 hours. Second, they could now estimate the general area where Hughes might have taken Melissa. By subtracting the distance from his home to the complex, could map out a search area based on the remaining mileage. This led them to an area covering roughly 25 square miles. To cover such a large space, the police enlisted the help of the military, called in helicopters and planes, and even brought in divers to search local bodies of water. Around 400 volunteers also joined the search. Melissa's father, who had flown in from Texas immediately after her disappearance, also took part. The police printed thousands of flyers with information about Melissa's disappearance, hoping to reach as many people as possible. It's worth noting that just 5 months before Melissa went missing, another young girl had disappeared from the same town. Her body was later found, but the police hadn't been able to identify the killer. While the large-scale search was underway, a team of forensic experts were sent to the complex. As we remember, the only potential lead the police had initially found was the open window in the boiler room. The experts examined the area and discovered something interesting. Just outside the window, there was a faint adult-sized boot print, and similar prints led all the way to the parking lot. There were no children's footprints, suggesting that the abductor had likely carried Melissa and placed her in a vehicle. The police had already searched Hughes' car but hadn't found anything useful. At this point, the FBI got involved. They still didn't have enough evidence to arrest Hughes, so they placed him under 24-hour surveillance. A judge also ordered him to provide a DNA sample in case any new evidence surfaced. As investigators dug into Hughes' background, they uncovered a troubling history. He had multiple arrests dating back to his teenage years. He also had a history of alcohol and substance abuse and had been suspected several times of inappropriate behavior towards minors. Further investigation revealed that a few years before the incident, had received a suspended sentence for stealing a car in a neighboring county. When the detectives looked deeper, they found that he had violated his probation, leading the judge to convert his suspended sentence into actual jail time. This gave the investigators a way to put Hughes behind bars, even if it was for a lesser crime. In the following weeks, the search for Melissa continued, but it was fruitless. The terrain made things even more difficult. Most of the area was covered in dense forests with a large river running through it. Then, about 2 months after Melissa's disappearance, something unexpected happened. An unidentified man called Tammy, claiming he had Melissa and demanded a ransom of $75,000. Tammy immediately informed the police, and the FBI agents advised her to gather the money and meet the caller. They quickly set everything up, placing dozens of agents around the area, and began waiting for the supposed kidnapper to show up. Before long, 2 men approached Tammy, and the FBI agents swiftly arrested them. It turned out these men had no connection to Melissa's disappearance. They were just 2 local university students who had seen the news about the missing girl and thought they could make some easy money. Instead, they earned themselves prison sentences. One was sentenced to 7.5 years, and the other received nearly 4 years behind bars. Once again, the investigators found themselves at a dead end. They had a prime suspect, but no solid evidence and no sign of Melissa. In a move to break the case, the detectives decided to re-examine Hughes' car more thoroughly using advanced forensic tools from the FBI. But there was a catch. The car belonged to his wife, so they needed her permission. Fortunately, she immediately agreed, and the forensic team began their work. First, they applied luminol, which revealed traces of blood on the driver's seat mat, pedals, steering wheel, and windshield. This deepened their suspicions of Hughes, but once again, they were unable to extract a usable DNA sample from the blood. Next, the experts decided to search the car for hair, fibers, and other potential clues. But they faced another significant challenge. The car was a mess. The interior was covered in dirt, trash, and dog hair, making it difficult to identify useful evidence amidst the chaos. One of the experts came up with a plan to collect evidence manually using tape. He meticulously went over all the surfaces in the car, then sent the collected materials to the FBI's forensic lab. At first, they found mostly dog hair, which was irrelevant since Hughes and his wife owned 2 large dogs. But then, the forensic experts noticed a different type of hair, dyed black rabbit fur. He soon learned this was the same material used in the coat belonging to Melissa's mother, Tammy. To confirm the match, the experts requested Tammy's coat and verified that the rabbit fur was identical. Investigators theorized that the fur could have transferred to Melissa's clothing when she went to retrieve their coats or in other situations, as Tammy frequently wore the coat during winter and Melissa was always near her mother. In addition to the fur, the experts found a single light-colored hair that matched strands from Melissa's hairbrush. But the most significant clue was still to come. Numerous small red and blue fibers were found on the car's passenger seat. Since Melissa had been wearing a red and blue sweater and skirt on the night she disappeared, investigators needed to track down those exact clothing items to confirm the connection. They spoke with Melissa's grandmother, who had bought the outfit for her, but she couldn't recall the specific store. The police scoured local shops in an attempt to find matching clothes, but came up empty-handed. The forensic expert kept pondering how to prove the fiber similarity to Melissa's outfit. One evening, while discussing this dilemma with his wife, she asked him to describe the clothing. After hearing his description, she suggested that the items might have been sold at JCPenney, a major retail chain where she often shopped for their children. She even had a collection of JCPenney's catalogs from over the years. She decided to help and began searching through those catalogs, looking for similar clothing. A while later, as she flipped through a Christmas catalog from the previous year, she found what they were looking for. On page 11 was an outfit identical to the one Melissa had been wearing when she disappeared. The breakthrough allowed the investigators to establish a stronger link between Hugh's car and Melissa, as the fibers matched the clothes in the catalog. The FBI immediately contacted the company. They faced another setback. The outfit in question had completely sold out. However, the company offered a potential solution. Since the outfit was sold exclusively through catalogs and only 7,000 sets had been produced, they suggested providing the investigators with a list of all the buyers so the police could track down one of the outfits. The investigators began combing through the list, a task that took quite some time. Eventually, they caught a break. They found a man in Kentucky who had purchased the outfit for his granddaughter but had gotten the size wrong. As a result, the clothes had remained untouched in their original packaging for an entire year. For the investigators, this was the perfect option. The man agreed to send the outfit to the FBI and the forensic team got to work. This particular model had a unique feature. The manufacturer had created a custom shade of dark blue, coded 887, which was patented and hadn't been used in any other clothing line. After comparing the fibers from this outfit, the experts concluded that they were an exact match to the fibers found in Hugh's car. This provided compelling evidence that one of the 7,000 children who had been bought this outfit had been in his vehicle. Although it didn't definitely prove that Hughes had abducted Melissa, the odds of another child wearing this rare outfit being in his car were astronomically low. As a final step, the expert conducted an additional test. He collected over 100 similar colored fibers from various types of clothing and performed 7,983 tests to compare them with the fibers from Hugh's car. The results showed minimal differences across all the fibers, except for two types. The set from the store and the fibers from Hugh's passenger seat were 100% match. This eliminated any doubt that someone else wearing similar clothes could have been in Hugh's car. It had to be the exact outfit that Melissa was wearing. Despite this, the detectives still faced a difficult situation. They knew that the fiber evidence, while strong, was circumstantial, even combined with the blood on Hugh's boots in his car and other clues they had gathered. But with nothing else to go on, they decided to formally charge Hughes with Melissa's abduction. The prosecution argued that Melissa was likely dead based on the blood evidence. The fibers from her clothing found on the passenger seat of Hugh's car suggested that he might have forced her to remove her jacket, pointing to a possible motive. According to their theory, Hughes approached Melissa when she went to get the jackets at her mother's request. He then lured her into the boiler room under some pretext, carried her out through the window, and took her to his vehicle. After taking Melissa to an unknown location and presumably killing her, likely with a knife, Hughes disposed of the weapon and hid the body. This would explain his prolonged absence. Following the crime, Hughes attempted to clean the blood from his car and clothing, even going so far as to cut parts of his shoe soles that had been heavily stained. In a final effort, the police decided to conduct a polygraph test, hoping that, combined with all the other evidence, Hughes might finally confess. The state law required either the discovery of the victim's body or the identification of the exact location of the murder to file a murder charge. Since the penalty for kidnapping was significantly less severe, the investigators hoped that Hughes might confess. The polygraph results showed that Hughes provided deceptive answers to almost all key questions, but he still maintained his innocence. With no other options, the detectives had no choice but to proceed with charges of kidnapping. The trial began over 2 years after Melissa disappeared, and Hughes maintained his innocence. His defense attorney tried to challenge the circumstantial evidence, but the prosecution's argument had a much stronger impact on the jury. After 8 hours of deliberation, they found Hughes guilty, and he was sentenced to the maximum penalty, 50 years in prison. Since then, Hughes has remained behind bars. continuing to deny any involvement in Melissa's disappearance. The police made several more attempts to find her body, but none were successful. For years after the trial, an energy company worker discovered red fabric fragments in a lake within the search area. Divers were sent to investigate, but they also failed to locate Melissa. 8 years after her disappearance, her mother remarried and raised 4 stepchildren with her new husband. Although she took his surname, she continued to use her previous one everywhere, in case Melissa was still alive and trying to find her. As for Hughes, his story didn't end there. On August 2, 2019, he was released early for good behavior, having served just over half of his sentence. At the time of his release, he was 53 years old and has been free for several years now. Melissa is still listed as missing since her murder was never proven. However, very few people believe she could still be alive after all these years. The story is about a woman whose life is filled with lies from beginning to end. You will learn how the unscrupulous deceiver ends up in pursuit of big money and how many human destinies it can affect. Michelle grew up in the town of Hurst in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. The girl's mother left home in search of a better life, so the upbringing of children was the father. It was not easy for a man to raise 2 daughters alone. He survived on occasional earnings at a construction site and often relied on alcohol. In search of easy money, he repeatedly thought up and implemented devious plans for profit. He would take a job at one factory or another and deliberately injure himself in order to obtain insurance money compensation. The fraud scheme worked, but not for long. With the help of CCTV cameras at one of the workplaces, the scheme was uncovered and Michelle and Laura's father was sent into custody. Michelle grew up in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation from childhood. This was her normal life, from which she wanted to escape by any means possible. But it is impossible to escape from herself, because lies have already become a part of her life, and she simply did not know how to live differently. The girl dreams of growing up faster to get out of the hated poverty. At the age of 15, Michelle looks very spectacular, a petite brunette of athletic build. She attracts a lot of interest from guys both of her own and older age. Even then, Michelle realizes that with the help of her feminine power and charm, she can easily manage to manipulate any men in her environment in order to get what she wants. So in her life begins a series of love relationships with different men. At the age of 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries for the first time to 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien. She informs the boyfriend that she is expecting a baby. Kenneth, taking full responsibility for his young wife and future child, enlists in the army. The couple moves frequently. 2 more children are born to them in this marriage. One city is replaced by another. Temporary housing of the military was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. Such a life does not suit her, and after 5 years, she leaves, naming the reason for divorce beatings and cheating on the part of her husband. Michelle returns to her native Hurst. In front of relatives and friends, she appears as a victim of domestic violence and receives the necessary support and begins to organize her life anew. After a while, she falls in love with her former classmate, Brandon. The young man is head over heels in love with Michelle and gladly accepted her 3 children. The lovers prepare for the wedding. However, on the eve of the wedding, Michelle infuriates Brandon. It turns out that the girl did not divorce her first husband. She was very afraid to talk to him about divorce because of the abuse, so she did not send the documents. With the help of a lawyer, this issue was quickly settled and the couple was able to marry in 1994. At first, family life flowed calmly and measured. Brandon was engaged in the development of his IT company and Michelle worked as a dental assistant. A quiet family life was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. She has always needed more. She starts bringing home all sorts of dental equipment and supplies. The cash doesn't fit in her purse. Brandon suspected something wrong. Eventually, Michelle was caught stealing. It was only by luck that a trial was avoided. But Brandon's trust issues with his wife were just beginning. Responding to neighbors' reports that cars were frequently arriving at the house while he was at work, Brandon installed a tape recorder in several rooms of the house. Listening to the tape, he heard various men visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon does his own little investigation and learns that the reason for the divorce in Michelle's first marriage was her numerous infidelities, not her husband's beatings, as she told everyone. Brandon's patience broke, and he demanded a divorce. Michelle was furious that Brandon initiated the divorce, and while he was at work, she got back at him. "I had a very nice saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish in it. Brandon says. She poured comat into it and killed all the fish. But Michelle didn't stop there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle stuffed the dog with sleeping pills, which led to the death of the living creature. Michelle put Domino to sleep. If you're shocked at this point, we've only scratched the surface, Brandon says. It was a nightmare that wouldn't stop. You can't make that girl go away. Unfortunately, Brandon learned the truth about Michelle. When his own marriage was completely destroyed, everything Michelle did with Brandon Dixon pales in comparison to her adventures with other men. It was later revealed that John Paul Ray, also a student at the high school Michelle attended in Hearst, was the father of her first child. Instead of revealing this information to John, she told Kenneth O'Brien that the child was his, forcing him to marry her. Kenneth, for 13 years, thought the eldest son was his own. John later told police that Kenneth paid child support from age 5 to 18 and did not know he was not the father. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived in a common-law marriage for 8 years. Their relationship came to an abrupt end when John began to suspect his wife of cheating. Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair on the side. John moved out, leaving most of Michelle's possessions. Michelle's next love was Greg Williams. They were both not so young anymore. Both had a history of past marital failures. The man was married twice and had a daughter. After Greg and Katie divorced in 2003, the couple agreed to share custody of their common daughter, Taylor. However, there was no formal agreement on child support because the former spouses had a good relationship. Rich, successful, and generous Greg was a perfect match for Michelle. And Greg and Michelle had a common daughter, Michaela. A year later, they got married. Their marriage was like the American dream. Money, children, love, it was all in abundance. Michelle seemed to have made it through the thorns to the stars and got the life she had always dreamed of. Greg Williams held his family in very high esteem. He grew up in a family with fierce principles and achieved everything on his own from an early age. He loved sports and was a martial arts black belt. In addition to his love of exercise, Greg was also a fan of guns. Both he and Michelle had guns that they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle's gun, a silver .40 caliber pistol, was kept in a safe. But Greg kept his gun, a black Luber .45 caliber, always loaded in a case under his bedside table. The couple was determined to make their marriage a success. They threw birthday parties for their children from other marriages at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children would have barbecues and swim parties. Very often the house was full of friends. But despite the picturesque suburban home and a precocious daughter, Greg and Michelle were not the classic American couple. They met through an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their wild adult house parties led to numerous complaints from neighbors. Without making the matter public, couple decides to move out. The night before, Michelle and Greg had been unable to sleep for a long time. They were preparing to buy a new house for $4.5 million. They emotionally discussed the upcoming event. Greg stayed in the bedroom alone. Michelle went out to her crying daughter and fell asleep with her in the room. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call came in. Crying woman screamed into the phone that she and her husband had been attacked by a robber. She was injured and her husband had been shot. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Inside the home, detectives found a television on full volume and a baby sleeping on the couch. Michelle's daughter was sound asleep and unaffected in any way by the attack that occurred. The woman's behavior alerted police officers. She was behaving rather strangely and did not look like she had just experienced a burglary. Soon, the gated community was filled with police cars, detectives, and forensic experts. The lot was cordoned off, and police searched every inch of the nearly 5,000 square foot home. Michelle was fully dressed, had her hair styled, and was acting very calm. She told police she was asleep, but her clothing and demeanor said otherwise. As the only witness, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for questioning. After several hours of talking to police and investigators, Michelle's story began to fall apart like a house of cards. According to the woman, the intruder dressed in all black hit her on the head with a wrench. She fell from the blow, but was conscious and heard a gunshot. The stranger then fled through the back door of the house. Michelle Williams' account did not match what police saw at the scene. Greg Williams was shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun, presumably used by the intruder, was found near the back door next to a wrench. There were no fingerprints on either weapon. Neither was found to show any signs of forced entry. The family's valuables and money were untouched. Examined CCTV footage from a neighbor's camera showed that only one car had entered the gated community in the hours before the crime. Police confirmed that the car belonged to a newspaper delivery man. To confuse the investigation, Michelle came up with a version of the attack. She hit herself with a wrench and made their large house look like the scene of the attack. But detectives did their due diligence and noticed a number of details that didn't add up. Michelle Williams was fully dressed. Her hair was styled, and she had fresh makeup on her face. It gave the impression as if she was waiting for someone. The gun used during the crime was found in the house without any fingerprints. And the final detail that proved Michelle's lie was the $20,000 in cash that was not stolen in the robbery. Michelle had no explanation for why a successful businessman and devoted father decided to take his own life. But she was able to explain her behavior. Michelle claimed she wanted to spare their young daughter the bitter truth about her father's self-inflicted death. She admitted to police that she wiped down the gun and washed Greg's hands to cover up fingerprints, before desperately staging a home invasion and calling emergency services. As bizarre as that explanation was, it became obvious to police why no evidence was found in the house. Michelle admitted to wiping the crime scene with bleach and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to present a more realistic picture of the attack. From the beginning, Keller police doubted the credibility of Michelle's testimony. But at the time, no physical evidence was presented linking her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was soon released home. Around 5 p.m. on the evening of her husband's murder, Michelle went to her sister Laura's home and did not mention the late Greg's name once during the evening. Michelle cried from time to time, but it didn't seem sincere, her sister Laura Cusick said when questioned by police. The morning after the tragedy, Michelle woke up in a great mood. She was beautifully dressed, with her hair styled and makeup on. In high spirits, the recent widow went for breakfast at a famous restaurant that served the best pancakes with syrup. While the police were looking into the theory that Greg had taken his own life, struggling to find a motive and obtain credible evidence of it, Michelle herself presented the investigation with first a motive and then evidence of her guilt. Going through the documents from the first interrogation, the investigators were attracted by Michelle's words that she didn't care about a single penny, but her actions proved otherwise. After Greg's death, quickly begins liquidating assets from family companies and spending large sums of money. She cashes checks through Greg's IT company. The amount of checks cashed is not disclosed anywhere. In all likelihood, we are talking about a lot of money. After receiving cash from the sale of the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made one of her biggest blunders. She went to the insurance company hoping to get a payout on Greg's life insurance policy. Michelle was the sole beneficiary on Greg's life insurance policy, which was taken out on August 12, 2011, almost exactly 2 months before he was killed. But one important fact the woman missed: according to the terms of the insurance policy, Greg's death was not an insured event because he left his life voluntarily, and at the last moment she was denied the money. The desire to get the insured sum of $600,000 was the main motive for the crime. Later, another important fact of financial fraud comes to light that casts suspicion on the widow. Fictitious financial documents for a mortgage loan were used to purchase the house that Greg and Michelle had been preparing for on the eve of his death. The account numbers were intentionally changed, and the lender did not immediately notice the elaborate fraud. When Greg died, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account was not discussed until it caught the attention of the police. Michelle, confident of her impunity, writes a check for $18,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn and takes a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During the 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police were able to unravel his wife's web of deceit. An autopsy was performed on Greg, which proves that the man was shot from a range of 12 to 18 inches. Moreover, the toxicology examination conducted provided a report proving that Greg had a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Also, the police determined that there was no assault on the house. Mrs. Williams sedated her husband and shot him from a foot away after turning up the volume on the television. Daughter Michelle, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, based on the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, Greg Williams' death was officially ruled a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th as she was on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. Michelle was both the only witness to the crime and the only suspect. Bail was set at $522,000 to be released from custody pending a court hearing. But Michelle spent a week in custody and was released on $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, Michelle walked out of jail with a GPS monitor and under the arm of attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who was now officially representing her. Greg's first wife, Kathy, was furious when she found out that attorney Wincorn was defending Michelle. That money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it should never have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman who was accused of killing him. Online court records list Kenneth Wincorn as the attorney for Katie and Greg's divorce in 2003, and Wincorn's name and signature appear on legal documents regarding the custody agreement for their shared daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Kenneth Wincorn's defense of collusion with Michelle Williams will be exonerated by providing evidence. The divorce was handled by his company, and he personally never represented Greg. Kenneth Wincorn said he first learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. It was very shocking, Wincorn says, adding that Michelle later sought his help. After her plot to cash in on Greg's death is foiled, Michelle Williams changes her name to Shelley and appears as a fitness guru hoping to start a new life. On Facebook, Shelley publicly announced her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and heavily promoted it online. Armed with an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracker, Michelle spent the next few months enjoying her new boyfriend, fitness classes, and court hearings. She often appeared in court dressed for a night out on the town, wearing miniskirts, knee-length boots, and deep-cut blouses. She never mourned Greg's death for a second, says Greg's ex-wife, Kathy. Rob Conover was friends with Greg Williams for more than 20 years and attended many of Michelle's hearings. He recalls how she deftly manipulated police officers at the courthouse, making them see her as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle Williams took a plea deal with the county and pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. She will receive 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and for deadly dangerous conduct, a third-degree felony that only exists in a few states. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. Things can go differently. Play big, win big, or lose big, Michelle said in an interview. With the plea bargain, I expect to do a couple years, and after that I'll be out on parole. But in February 2014, Michelle Williams, in an interview, suddenly changes her testimony and says she is not guilty of the crime. The judge immediately rescinds the plea bargain and sets a date for the first trial. Opening arguments have begun in the trial of a Texas woman dubbed by the media as Keller's Black Widow, who was accused of intentionally targeting her husband in 2011 for an insurance payoff. Michelle Williams, 45, was charged with the crime. In court, prosecutors described the crime as a clearly planned scheme of acts to profit from Greg's substantial life insurance policy. In their opening statement, prosecutors told jurors that Mrs. Williams shot her husband in the head after drugging him with sleeping pills beforehand in order to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money, time-tested money, greed. Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland said in court. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. In response to an interview request, Michelle's attorney released a statement on her behalf. Attorney Kenneth Wincorn described the difficulties in the case caused by the spotlessly clean crime scene. The prosecution struggled to prove a premeditated crime, disregarding the fact that there was no DNA from the suspect. In repeated searches, cleaning products were found, but it stands to reason that Michelle's fingerprints were on them, since the products were in the house where she lived and did the cleaning. If the jury concludes that Michelle tampered with evidence of Greg's death, making it look like the man had spontaneously passed away and then cleaned up the crime scene by hiding evidence and then lying about it, she will get a life sentence. But if Michelle is sentenced as scheduled on April 21st, no jury will ever get a chance to hear the whole story and decide on the appropriate punishment. Through careful questioning of the Williams couple's friends and acquaintances, information regularly emerged about the unfavorable environment that had prevailed in their family for a long period of time. According to the studied correspondence in social networks and messengers, it was found that the couple quarreled very often, and the reason was finances. At the trial, prosecutors said that in the hours leading up to the violent death, Greg Williams argued with his wife over their finances and even slapped her for spending a large amount of money that had been set aside as a down payment on a house. But Michelle Williams' defense argued that Greg Williams had taken his own life and that the successful business owner needed his wife alive, not dead. According to defense attorney Clay Graham, Greg Williams often suffered from depression and regularly used sedatives and steroids. On the eve of the crime, he was allegedly severely depressed due to the loss of his grandmother and best friend, who ironically had taken his own life. Defense counsel told the court that when Michelle Williams found her husband dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, she panicked and in a fit of fear began to cover up the tragedy without realizing it. She had one goal: to protect her 4-year-old daughter from psychological trauma by hiding the truth from her. Michelle Williams never once changed herself, presenting at court hearings in different images with styled hair and manicure. At one hearing, the defendant, dressed in an off-white blouse and black vest, showed little emotion throughout most of the trial, but did not forget to wipe away tears during a presentation of photographs showing images of the body of murdered Greg Williams. The court also heard testimony from Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, who said his mother Michelle Williams asked him to help frame Greg Williams' ex-wife, Kathy. She planned to blame her for Greg's death using the motive of unreconciled differences over the custody of their daughter, Taylor. But that plan was a failure from the get-go. After all, there was never any disagreement between the former spouses about the custody of their daughter, and it would have been very difficult to prove otherwise. Asked about his reaction to his mother's unusual request, 26-year-old Andrew O'Brien said he was very shocked by such a proposal and thought she was having a mental breakdown. Michelle confronted her sons at the trial when they testified against her. The jury later found Michelle guilty of felony tampering with physical evidence. According to the show, she provided false information that she was pregnant with twins, hoping to delay her sentencing. But this version was not confirmed, and the verdict was announced. Michelle's acting abilities and her natural charm, which she tried her best to demonstrate during each hearing, did not spare her from a harsh sentence. Sandwiched between a scenario in which she was a cold-blooded criminal and one in which she was portrayed as a deranged wife and mother acting on impulse, Michelle chose the latter. "He did it," she said, wrapping her arms around her head. Michelle even congratulated the detective on solving the case. "I wouldn't have gotten through the day," she said. "You've won." Even before the police admitted to doubting Michelle's story, few believed Greg had lost his life. He had too much to live for, and he knew all too well how much pain and untimely death causes. Kathy Williams believes that Michelle's relationship with Gene Wallace began when Greg was still alive and may be the elusive motive for this crime. If Greg had found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have dumped her, and she would have gotten nothing. Katie says, Greg was willing to put up with a lot, but he wasn't willing to put up with cheating. "She's ruined so many lives you can't even imagine." Brandon says, "She's a professional manipulator." If the courts had gone further and interviewed all of us, things could have gone in a different direction. Michelle was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The judge also ruled that she would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Michelle currently remains incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Michelle Williams is a felon and fraudster who is currently serving time in prison for all of her willful acts. She has never shown remorse for her actions and still refuses to take full responsibility for her crime.